Well, good morning. The introduction this morning about changing, getting a little bit more personal to the people, I think is true, but I find it interesting on what I'm going to present on today is parallels very much what we talked about yesterday, and a couple of the different pieces involved with it. I've titled this the Integrated Passenger Processing. I saw a theme today too for our group on departure. So I've kind of focused a little bit on departure too. We've been working with technology for most of our career in our company. I've been a company since 1999 and have focused really in that, but where we've moved to is quite a bit more in this business processing area, looking at the passenger and the people on how they use airports and what they're trying to do. The idea of maybe getting back to the romance of flying, if we do, it will be a little bit different than it was before, at least from the culture. And yesterday we talked a little bit about the different stakeholders within an airport. And I've focused a little bit on the three primary ones, the airline, the airport, and the passenger, the airport authority and the passenger. And really, when I look at what has been titled the seamless journey, and I think that's a buzzword that is really growing in our industry. Everyone looks at how to create the seamless journey. I've got these next three slides that focus on the perspective of the seamless journey from each one. This first one, of course, the airport perspective, where an airport and an airport authority looks at really how does a passenger travel through my facility, starting off airport, moving to the departure or the transfer or the arrival. And in international facilities, the transfer passenger is really the one that there's a lot of focus to now. But when an airport authority looks at a passenger, they've got some ideas of what they want for that passenger. And I've put up here a few of those, obviously the commercial aspect of a passenger, convenience and predictability. How comfortable is the passenger traveling through my airport? And the personalization idea of making this available. What we're working on in Orlando and some of the things that we've got going on in there, Fentress Architects, they're really, the whole idea of technology, how can we make this to where you're either starting or you're ending your vacation and making the airport a part of that vacation? And how can technology play in that? And of course, the quality of the time that you're in my airport, self-service. We hear that all the time, and awareness in communications. Today, an airport authority really wants to know where the passenger is, and there's a lot of good reasons for that too. And irregular operations, if you look at our airports today, the one theme that's going on is every airport is congested. And every airport is growing beyond the design capacity of that facility. We're working with airports that are already 10 and 15% beyond the design capacity. So how do I now handle that kind of passenger flow and traffic through my facility? And one thing that often hits an airport is, of course, an irregular operation. And in such case, and it might be a predictable one, we know the storm is coming, and it might be an unpredictable one. The systems just went down. Whatever the case may be, having an understanding of where those passengers are and how to reach them is very important. From an airline perspective, and I took these from one of the different alliances. These quotes come from Star Alliance, and slightly different, of course. From an airline perspective, what's most important for the passenger is consistency across airports. Quite frankly, an airline doesn't really care that much about the passenger in a particular airport, so long as every airport that they go into, it's consistent. That for my passengers, especially the elite passengers, they want predictability, and they want fewer manual checks, and really the difference for them is speed. How can my passengers process through your airport quickly and get on my airplane? And that's a focus there for them. And notice some of the technological focuses. This idea of one ID, and I'll mention the single token approach. And there's another buzzword building up, and you'll see that throughout this presentation here. This idea that how can I maintain the information that the passenger needs and that I need from the passenger through a single token. Whether it's on the cell phone and it's the NFC chip on the phone, whether it's biometrics, whatever that technology is, how can I keep that thread throughout and perhaps reduce the amount of times a passenger has to present all of the various documents, and making it more and more paperless, a consistent experience, but across airports, not within a single airport. And that term there, gliding through the airport. Of course, you get to the passenger. And the passenger has a different perspective. What's interesting about the passenger today, the passenger already comes prepared to a certain extent within ready to travel. I mean, every one of us, in this picture here kind of gives a graphic idea that every one of us has a virtual self that travels along with us. And in that virtual self, there are things that are put into your record or yourself that you don't necessarily have too much say-so in. Some of us might, hopefully not, but some of us might travel with a watch list part of your virtual self. And you get to security and you can't go any further. You really didn't want that as part of your record, but it's there. And this idea of the PNR, the passenger name record, when a passenger makes the reservation for the first time, whether you're using a reservation agent, whether you're going directly to the airline, a PNR is opened up on you. And everything about you is put into that PNR. As far as your personal information that they're not allowed to share, and that information, and we've heard about this where information today is still being blocked. You know, we as airports, and I say I work more with the airport authorities than I do with the airlines, but we as airports, we look at it and say, gee, Mr. Airline, it'd be great if you could share the information about the passenger as they're coming into my facility, because at minimum, I just want to be able to reach out to them. And the airlines say, no, can't share that information. That's private, that's secure, and I can't trust you with it. The airlines have the same problem. When a passenger makes a reservation through a reservation agency, and they own the record, the airlines go to the reservation agency and say, gee, I really want you to share that information with me, because if my passenger is in an airport and I have an irregular operation, I want to get information to them quickly. And the agencies say, no, I don't think so. That's my passenger. But those walls are beginning to break down. But all that information that we carry in there, some of it we want to carry in there because we may be an elite passenger. And I want to be treated special when I go through the airport. And I want you to know that I want to be treated special when I arrive. And I like that information about there. And some of the virtual self I put in there myself. How I want to travel. Recently, a while back, I went through Geneva Airport, and Geneva Airport offers a special deal to where you can go onto their website, and for 13 Swiss francs, you can buy a token, a 2D barcode that downloads to your cell phone, and you can use that to short circuit the long lines that they typically have at the security checkpoint, and you can go right on in as an elite passenger. And I thought, well, that's the way I want to travel. I want to have that special code, and I bought that 2D barcode, and I went up there and it was on my cell phone, and the first thing, of course, that I realized when I got to Geneva was I also had to have their network. And 10 minutes already? Wow. Yeah, it's like 2 out of 200. Where I went through and I looked at all those poor people over there in line, and I went through in 2 minutes. And I knew that they were going to be there in 30 minutes, and I was feeling pretty happy about myself, and put everything in the bins, and off it went. And then the first thing that the security agent told me was, well, I need to see your passport and your boarding pass. I said, well, my boarding pass is on my cell phone, which just went through the scanner. They weren't prepared for me on how I wanted to travel and how I set up my virtual record. And I found that there were several points throughout my journey that they weren't prepared for what I wanted to know how to travel, which is the problem that passengers are doing, because now if indeed passengers are coming prepared to journey through the airport the way they want to travel, it's really the responsibility of the airport to be ready. In the olden days, we had operational or functional areas in an airport, whether it was off-airport, landside, security, airside, boarding, in-flight. There were areas that as an airport facility, I wanted you to check in the check-in area. In fact, we used to call it ticketing, right? And once you were finished with check-in, you processed through security and you continued on. But for a passenger today, I might check in on the flight that I'm on for my next flight because they provide me wireless, and I want to do that. And really now it comes down to what happens in the areas through which passengers pass that need to be defined. What is it that my passengers want to do in my check-in hall? And what is it that my passengers are ready to do at every journey point throughout the facility? And if I look at really the departures, or the first picture here, which we don't want to be a part of that, but in the security area, those passengers make up very different demographics. And it's really approaching those demographics and understanding how that passenger is prepared to travel that then I can provide them a means to do so. So not necessarily creating a line that is unmanageable. I now look at the demographic of the passenger more carefully on where and how they are traveling through my facility. Because airports differ in the demographics. In Orlando Airport, again, they deal with a lot of domestic families, a lot of suitcases, and a lot of different ways that passenger travels through. And if I break down how that passenger travels and understand them better, I can predict and use the technologies better to meet them. And we heard yesterday that the profiles are changing. And there are many different passenger profiles when you consider it. And in the U.S. right now, we're looking at the special needs or the disability a little bit careful, because there's a large initiative on the disabilities that they want to travel without being special. So if I can approach a kiosk and do everything on a kiosk, whether I'm blind or I'm I'm close to blind, close to deaf, I want to be able to use that same kiosk in a manner that if I wasn't. That changes technology, and that changes the approach on how the technology looks, and whether that type of passenger or a transfer passenger is in. Today, people buy tickets through multiple different ways, and you might find the cheapest ticket by flying in on Aer Lingus and exiting on another aircraft. Well, in my airport, those are two different terminals, and you didn't know that arriving, and I didn't know that's how you bought your tickets. I've got to be prepared for that kind of passenger, and how many of those passengers like that travel through my facility. At Las Vegas, they thought that was a small number. They found that was a growing number. 5%, 10% of their passengers are now transferring across terminals, and how do I now approach that and help my passenger through technology? So just kind of briefly here, looking at the check-in hall. The check-in hall has gone through multiple different iterations, and from a technological perspective, I thought I'd throw up two here real quick, not throw up on the audience, but throw up on the screen. There's two different approaches to the check-in today. You might hear one-step, two-step processes, and that's really just understanding how many different steps does a passenger have to take to finish that check-in process, to get the boarding pass and to drop the bag off. And in Auckland Airport, they've really, Air New Zealand was challenged to eliminate queue lines completely. And in less than a year, they came up with the concept of completely, they removed all of their desks. There are no check-in counters to go to in the domestic hall at Air New Zealand in Auckland Airport. You come up to these kiosks, and the passenger now, in a two-step process, weighs their bag, gets the bag tag, puts it on, moves over to on the back where there used to be desks is nothing but a long conveyor belt, and they drop their bag and off they go. And we watched and we did time demographics, and queue lines were completely eliminated. For them, this was an amazing process. In the U.S., we couldn't do every step like this because of our security issues, but we can learn from that. In Gatwick Airport, I was recently there because looking at what they've done with the one-step process, they moved everything to a single step to where the passenger, once they do have a document, they go into this large area and they do everything at there. They can even change. They can buy additional seating. They can do whatever at the single step, get the bag tag, put it all on, put the bag on the system, and off it goes. And it's a very successful process there. This particular airline, EasyJet, once again, you see that there are no counters. There's nothing. And EasyJet you went from a 30-minute wait to a 1 to 2 minute process, and it was very good. And the transformation of the check-in hall has gone from a ticketing hall to a check-in hall to really an entrance hall. How does now an airport facility look at the entrance hall or the check-in hall in a different manner, and what is it that makes that unique in its self-service? One thing that I'll point out on this slide, we won't read all of them, but because I don't have the time, it used to be static signage. 5 minutes. And it's now dynamic signage. And what we are looking at now is how much content-rich signage do I want to present to my passengers and at the right time, and now how do I interact with that? And really, when I'm designing the facility, I've got to consider those technologies. And the self-service, where we're at with passenger self-service and the common use bag drops and these items, it was mentioned yesterday that we're not there yet, and indeed we're not fully there. And what we have to do is look at, all right, how, as technology changes, as the processes change, how do I work with my facility? And this is, the classic check-in hall, where might be the international, where the islands are. And this, I'm sure you've looked at and used check-in hall facilities like this, where also in the domestic, where you approach the line and your passenger flow through there back to security, and it's fairly standard. I looked in here and said, but now, and what I've done now, when I'm looking at my passenger demographics, I've boiled this down to one slide. And in the middle, when I look at the passenger, this is a generalization. Really, if I want to do it right, I've got use cases for each type of passenger. I've looked at the majority of my passengers, and I'm trying to reach each one specifically. And then I establish my business requirements based on that, and I boil it down. But generally speaking, I want clear instructions. I do only the relevant actions that I want to do, and I work my way down this process to where now I look at the check-in hall from how do I want to move those passengers through. Because I've got a set of passengers that are prepared, and they don't even need my check-in hall anymore. And they just want to get to security checkpoint, they want to move on. So I want to make sure that my facility is designed in a way to process those passengers through that manner the best way I can. The semicircles, and this is not a design, but the semicircles represent the one-step or two-step process that I know is going to grow. So when I'm architecturally looking at the facility, I want to minimize the amount of floor penetrations. I want to create an environment that allows this area to grow or shrink. And where I'm going to manage my queue lines, I want to get those away from the primary flow and push them to the back side, because I know that the full service counters are going to reduce as I grow. So now I can look at the facility once I understand the type of passenger demographic that I have, and I can design that area a little bit more appropriately than I could before. Taking a picture from Singapore, this is, of course, if we had this kind of space to design an area like this. But interesting enough on this picture, which is just a schematic, note though on the demographic, if I'm really looking at this, Singapore, there's no one carrying a lot of bags. I don't necessarily know if that's a true statement or not, but I want to make sure I understand that before I lay out the area. In JFK, JetBlue did a tremendous job in redesigning their facility to allow this kind of process once they understood the passenger. Basically looking at using technology to help transform the facility and moving with them. I thought it might be good, because then once you've done that, and this picture just is a generalization once again, where you're mapping the passenger flow through the entire facility and looking at every passenger, because now with this single token idea, I want to look at how can I use that information with that passenger, whether it's commercial activity or whether it's simply boarding activity, on how to address that with the passenger the best I can. In closing, real quickly, just a couple of the trends out there. And we talked about technologies yesterday, and this idea that bags recovery, or bags ready to go, basically how the bags are prepared and processed in a self-service. Each one of these areas, IATA is, and that's the International Air Transport Association, from an airline perspective, they are trying to move their passengers, and they're rating their airlines on how good they're doing it. And the top 10 airlines in the world as far as automation and providing these types of hooks for passengers. That will continue to grow. In fact, IATA is now looking at creating a new group called the Seamless Service, which we'll be a part of, to understand the whole seamless journey. Yesterday we talked about biometrics. Aruba and KLM, part of Schiphol Group, did this happy flow idea where now the entire demographic of that passenger, boarding pass, everything is put into a biometric, and once they're enrolled at the beginning, they never show any of their boarding documents again. It's all validated at every process through with the biometric, whether it's the iris or a finger or whatever the case may be. This is really picking up momentum. U.S. is looking at it from a regulatory perspective, but Singapore is now working with Schiphol Group to say, hey, can I do this throughout my entire journey of the passenger? We talked about passenger awareness and passenger contact, on how we want to look at passengers and the mobility. There's a lot of information on the mobile that we won't go into. The kiosks, whether they'll survive, is unknown. Baggage processing, how that works. Common use in an airport, how that facility works at. And then in the end, I'll just wrap up with this because I know my time is up. Passenger flow integration. From a technology perspective, airports are getting very smart on how they manage information and how they share information. And from an industry perspective, we're moving it, of course, more to the cloud, and how we manage and providing to you the mobile applications to where from the same application you can get everything you need through your journey process. That's just some ideas on where we're going with this. I want to thank you for the time.